Very pleased to say we're once again joined in the studio by the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab. Mr Raab, good to see you this morning.
Good morning.
Clearly, there is an awful lot to discuss in terms of Afghanistan moving forward, but we do need to go back to last week, to the tail end of last week. On Friday, Kabul was, we now know, 48 hours from being taken over by the Taliban. You spoke to the Prime Minister from your holiday on Friday. What was the content of that conversation?
Well, look, I'm not going to go into all of the details. Those are private conversations. But what we were overwhelmingly focused on with the COBRA meetings, the meetings I had with the director running the emergency response, and indeed the international engagement that I was focused on, is two things. Securing the airport so that evacuation flights could come in and out. Secondly, boosting our teams on the ground. We now have 19 Foreign Office officials, many Home Office officials, so we can process not just the UK nationals, but the Afghans who worked for us. And I would just say this, if you look from that date forward, over 9,000 people have been given safe passage to the UK. I don't think there's been an airlift on that scale, that level of complexity in living memory.
Indeed, and we will dwell on that as well during this interview. But you were 3 days away on Friday from making your way back to the United Kingdom.
I came back on Sunday evening, actually.
Indeed, sorry, apologies too. What was the intelligence assessment on Friday of how long it would take the Taliban to take over the capital of Afghanistan?
Well, I don't go into the specific intelligence, but we don't discuss intelligence matters and operational assessments. But I can tell you this, and it's been clear all along, clearly the scale and pace of the fall of Kabul came as a surprise to everyone around the world, not just Western powers like the UK and the US, but when I was speaking to the Qataris, the Pakistanis, I think even the Taliban was surprised. But of course, we can learn those lessons with hindsight. We dealt with the reality that we saw it.
But in terms of the conversation that you had with the Prime Minister, had you been ordered to come back to the United Kingdom, to be at your desk for the fall of Kabul, did you lobby the Prime Minister to work remotely?
All of those claims and suggestions are not true. Well, we discussed the matter. I agreed to come back on Sunday. I'm not going to add further to the speculation around that. But the idea, some of the reporting, some of the assertions you put to me, just not true. But we were focused overwhelmingly on securing the airport, making sure, and I was engaged in meetings, the stuff about me being lounging around on the beach all day, just nonsense. The stuff about me paddleboarding, nonsense. The sea was actually closed. It was a red notice. I was focused on the COBRA meetings, the Foreign Office team, the Director and the Director General, and the international engagement. And as a result of the actions of the government, 9,000 people, British nationals, Afghan workers, were secured back to the UK.
But the reason this is significant is demonstrated by a poll in the Mail this morning, which shows a majority of people want you to lose your job for not coming back from your holiday. The fact that, as the Commons debate demonstrated, there are people within your own party who feel the government was disinterested in what was going on the ground. You were on holiday. The Prime Minister was on holiday. The Permanent Secretary at the Foreign Office was on holiday. The Minister responsible for Afghanistan was on holiday.
Well, self-selecting reader polls in newspapers, I'm afraid, are not a particularly accurate barometer. But in terms of what we're doing at all material times, look, as Foreign Secretary, of course, with the benefit of hindsight, I wouldn't have gone away. But that's the luxury of commentators, not politicians. And if you're the Foreign Secretary, I'm travelling all the time for work purposes. I always need to be able to grip crises that arise, and that's what we were doing.
Do you regret not coming back earlier?
Look, of course, as I said, with the benefit of hindsight, I would have been back earlier. But we were all surprised by the scale and the pace of the collapse of the situation in Kabul. And as I said, I was still doing all the things you would need me to do to focus on what really mattered. Engaging in the COBRA meetings, but critically securing, ramping up the Foreign Office presence in Kabul and working with the MOD, Ben Wallace, the Home Secretary, to make sure we could not just secure the airport, but get the people home. We got over 9,000 people home since that point in time. And I do think that demonstrates that we were on the job.
Just in terms of where we are with the repatriation, it's reported this morning that you've briefed MPs that in essence, all British nationals, all mono-nationals, people with just single British citizenship are basically out of the country. Is that accurate?
So there's a whole range of cases, but basically mono-nationals, so single nationality UK, who have got documentation, the lion's share, almost all of them that want to come out, have been brought home. The ones that are remaining, and we've done an amazing job, 2,500 UK nationals, if you go back to April, and remember it was in April, it wasn't just all starting in August, where we said you must leave the country, you should leave the country, we'll support support you to do so. So we've seen 2,500 British nationals come back. What remains are rather complex cases, large family units where one or other may be documented or may be clearly a national, but it's not clear whether the rest of them are. So we've got a great team on the ground in Kabul and in King Charles Street in the FCDO checking and getting all of those residual cases on where they're eligible.
Obviously, again, for intelligence reasons, you will not be able to put a specific time on when we will be out of Afghanistan. I understand that. There are, however, suggestions that the withdrawal could begin in as little as 24 to 48 hours. Can you comment on that?
Well, look, for precisely the reason you gave, I'm not going to give the precise time. And what we do know is that we're working towards the end of the month. The military planners will work out how much time they need to withdraw their equipment, their staff. And what's really important is we'll make the maximum use of all the time we have left. Just to give you a sense, Niall, in the last 24 hours, I checked the numbers coming in, we've secured 2,000 back to the UK. So the system is operating at full speed, at full capacity, and we'll use every last remaining hour and day to get everyone we can back. The British nationals, the Afghans who work so loyally for us, we're getting the achieving scholars back, also women's rights defenders and journalists.
Indeed. But just in terms of the timeline, given that everyone from the Prime Minister down, I think you've said this as well, has basically made it clear that our military presence on the ground in Kabul is predicated on the Americans being there as well. We will have to come out before they do. It is fair to say, isn't it, then, on the basis of that timeline, that we may well be out by the end of the weekend?
Well, we'll work to the end of August, but we'll take back from that, you step back from that, the time that we need to withdraw our military operation. The military plans are firming that up. I can't give you the precise details because we want to make sure we use every last hour and day to keep this rate up. And we've done and again, I just stress, the teams on the ground and in King Charles Street, the Emergency Response Centre, done an amazing job. Since April, over 11,000 people given safe passage back to the UK. It's never been done before, and no country has done better.
We know that there will be people who will not be able to make it back before the August 31st deadline. Again, suggestions this morning that in some fashion, Kabul International Airport could continue to see people leaving on civilian flights. Have we had conversations with the Taliban about the possibility of this?
We do engage with the Taliban militarily on the ground and in Doha with the political representation. I think we would like to see Kabul Airport go back to being functional. That will require on the security on the ground. It'll require it to be done safely, and of course, it'll require the Taliban to live up to their assurances about allowing safe passage out. They've actually so far tried to be constructive, as we've seen with the numbers we've got, and tried to be constructive in their own way. And what we've then got to do is test them beyond the withdrawal date. Will they still allow safe passage as they've undertaken? Will they allow humanitarian groups the permissive environment to be able to operate? So there is a next stage of engagement, not recognition, engagement with the Taliban. And we will hold them very clearly to the assurances that they're already stating.
We heard it yesterday, though, that the head of the CIA travelled to Kabul to meet with the Taliban directly. Has something similar happened with the head of MI6? Has Richard Moore held any meetings with the Taliban?
Richard Moore's the head of MI6, not MI5, but we will engage diplomatically as well as through the military presence on the ground. I won't say too much more, but I do think what I would say now is it's important that we can convey our messages directly, and one of the ways that we've been able to handle this pretty epic evacuation is by being able to engage and convey clear messages. I do think that's important, and we'll want to make sure there's some continuity to that.
But just, can you at least give us a sense that the UK spy chief is engaging directly with the Taliban, trying to help secure the mission?
I'm not going to comment on either C or the nature or depth of our engagement, but as I mentioned, of course, on the ground in relation to the airport, we engage with their British troops, the Taliban, cheek and jowl, and also via the political commission, which is based in Doha, we make sure that we can engage.
Speaking to your colleague Ben Wallace yesterday, I mean, he made it pretty clear, obviously, the security situation around the airport is pretty severe. And the closer we get to August the 31st, the greater the risk of some form of attack on the Allied forces there. Is it your understanding that Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, any of those other groups are extant in Afghanistan at the moment, are operational in Afghanistan?
I think we're obviously concerned about the way the prisons were emptied by the Taliban. So, of course, that means that we're ever vigilant about that potential risk. Clearly, one of the key things that we're saying to the Taliban is, first of all, to continue the safe passage of people out, British nationals and others. They're saying, the Taliban spokesman said yesterday he wanted to avoid the brain drain. Well, actually, in that case, they're going to need to be a lot more tolerant and inclusive than they've been before. And of course, the number one thing for us beyond safe passage will be making sure Afghanistan is never used as a base for terrorism again. And the Taliban has said that they're committed to that.
What are the levers we can use to exert some form of influence over the Taliban? You yourself have written about the potential for sanctions. We know, however, that perhaps as much as 60% of the Afghan state budget comes from money from overseas. If we are to turn off the taps in terms of the money, we will see an even greater humanitarian catastrophe, won't we? There's always the risk with sanctions that you need to target them in a way that protects the civilians and deals with the individuals that you want to hold to account. There's a whole range of things, the amount of aid that they'll need, the access to the international financial system, billions of pounds. The Taliban are saying they do not want the whole economy and social fabric such as it is in Afghanistan to collapse. That gives us leverage on them in relation to those key asks: safe passage out, never to allow Afghanistan to be used for terrorism, and indeed the permissive environment that they will need to provide if they want the UN NGOs to operate in Afghanistan. If they don't, we're not going to give aid to the Taliban. We would only do it via those third parties. Of course, the G7 yesterday made it very clear, look, taken together, we have an awful lot of economic and diplomatic clout. However, look at those countries which still have an embassy open on the ground there: Russia, China. If Afghanistan strikes bilateral deals with them, that does make it rather more difficult for the G7 to exert its influence, doesn't it? Well, first of all, I think the PM was absolutely right. Take the lead, use the G7 presidency, get the G7 together, and the statement was pretty thorough, a starting point for the way forward. But you're right, we need a broader group of countries. I've been speaking to my Chinese opposite number. We are pressing the Russians as well, and indeed the countries in the region. I've spoken to the Indian, the Pakistani foreign ministers. If we want to exert maximum moderating influence on the Taliban, such as it is, and with all due scepticism, we're going to need to operate in a broader caucus. That's one of the reasons why we're pressing for a meeting of the permanent five members of the Security Council, which includes China, Russia, as well as France, the UK and the US, in the coming days, to provide at least the contours of a way forward that we can all agree on. A lot for you to be getting on with, so we'll let you get on with it. Dominic Raab, good to see you. Good to talk to you.